This is Mr. Gillum, and today we're going to be using equations with percents. And so we're going to be setting up some equations and solving them for the missing whole number or the missing percent. There are a few key words that I want you to really concentrate on. Sometimes they're not actually on the problem, but when you think about it, you'll hear yourself saying these words, and that'll give you a clue as how to solve the problem. When you think about the word of, think multiply, like 1/5 of 10 would be 1/5 times 10. And so we would know that it would equal 2. 1/5 of 10 is 2. And so of is an indicator to multiply. And I think I circled of and I always wrote multiply on it yesterday. Is a way to say equal in math. And so 3 plus 2 is 5, okay, or 3 plus 2 equals 5, okay, is like a substitute word for 5. Before you do anything in your equation, though, make sure your percent is written as a decimal. And keep in mind that percent means per 100, so we're going to divide it by 100, or move the decimal place 2 spots, okay? All right, I think that's everything we needed to talk about as far as review goes. Of means multiply, is equal. Change the percent to a decimal by moving the fraction or the decimal place 2 places to the left. And so let's take a look at some of these problems here. And we're going to set up an equation and try to figure out what the problem's asking. It says if 50 is 40% of a value, what is the value? Okay, now we practiced number sentences as well. I see 50 is 40% of a number or a value. We don't know what the value is, so let's just use n or x or y or z or whatever letter you would like to use would be fine. And so now what I have here is an equation. I have an equal sign. I have 50 on one side balanced with 40% of a number that we don't know on the other side. And before I begin to solve my equation, I'd like to move the decimal place on the percent so I can have a decimal. 50 equals 0.4. I could put point, just a reminder, 40% is 0.40, but really this is 0. There's nothing behind the 0, so it's insignificant. So I'm going to write 0.4n. All right. And so from there, it's just I can do this several different ways. I can say, oh, okay, well, I don't like having decimals in my equation, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. That's one of the strategies that we learned. And that makes it 500 equals 4n. Okay, now that I don't have decimals, I can divide both sides by 4. And so n equals 500 fourths. But really that reduces into 250. 2 goes into 2 once and into 250 125 times. So n would equal 125. And so that is the value, 125. Okay, you could also start with the equation 50 equals 0.4n and just divide both sides by 0.4. But if you're not using your calculator, I think the more appropriate way would be the strategy to multiply both sides by 10 to move the decimal out of the way. All right, so we're setting up an equation to help us find the missing value. In this case, it says if 12 is, so 12 is 30% of a value that we don't know, what is the value? Okay, well, I know that 30%, if I think about 30%, I know that's 30 per 100 or 0.3. Really, it's 0.30, but we're going to say 0.3 because the 0 is insignificant. Say 12 equals 0.3n. And again, we could just divide both sides by 0.3 the old-fashioned way, but if we don't know how to divide decimals very well, that's going to be tricky. So let's use a different strategy. Let's try to multiply both sides of the equation by 10 to get rid of that decimal point. 120 equals 3n. And so if 3n equals 120, I now can divide by 3 on both sides. n must equal 40. So the number would be 40. All right. Let's take a look at another one here. It says, very similar to the ones that we just did. It says, if 6 is equals 4% of a value that we don't know, what is the value? Oh, this is going to be a tricky one because we did a 40% and a 4% is a little different. When I think about 4%, and still 4 per 100, so I still need to move the decimal place 2 spots. Now after I move it once, a lot of you are going to be tempted to just put 0.4 again, but that's not really 4%, that's 40%. We had to move the decimal place 2 times no matter what because percent always means per 100, it never means per 10. 2 spots is per 100, so 0.04. So it's very important that we get this 0, and this 0 is significant because it's in front of a number. Okay, 0 tenths and 4 hundredths. If I ignored the 0, I would have 4 tenths and 0 hundredths. Okay, or if I switched them around. So we need to make sure that we move it percent 2 spots, placeholder 0. It's significant because there's a 4 behind it. So 6 equals 0.04n. And so now, again, I have this unfortunate decimal in my equation here. It's just kind of a frustrating thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by 100. Okay. If you're using a calculator, the fastest way to be divide both sides by 0.04 right off the bat. But we're going to avoid the use of our calculators and practice our equation solving skills. 600 equals 4n. I know it's 600 because when I multiply something by 100, it moves it 2 decimal places. Kind of like dividing by 100, moves it 2 decimal places the other direction. When I multiply by 200, moves it twice, and I don't write 04n, I would just write 4n. The 0 is in front of the number. It's not significant. With 0 tens is what that would mean. Now I can divide by 4 and solve for n. n equals, see here, 600 fourths, and let's go ahead and reduce that to 300, 150. So n equals 150. That would be the number. Okay, that's the value. 6 is 4% of 150. This one changes a little bit. That's just a different question. It says 45 is what percent? We don't know what percent. I'm going to put question mark percent of 60. Of 60. I shouldn't write the word of 60. I should write times 60. Okay, so let's take a look here. This problem is one that we're going to just, there's really no way to avoid it. I think we're going to have to use a calculator. So instead of putting question mark percent, let's just put n percent. So we don't know how much percent. And I'm going to simplify this to 45 equals 60 times n percent. Okay. And to solve this equation, I want to get n all by itself. We need to know what percent it is. So I'm going to divide both sides by 60. And I know that 45 divided by 60, and in this case, we're going to want to use a decimal because we're calculating a percent. In this case, we're going to say 45 60 is 3/4, which Mr. Gillum knows is 0.75. When I divide 45 divided by 60, it equals 0.75. That equals n percent. Now I know that the percent that I'm talking about is already moved 2 decimal places, so if I'm looking for that percent, I need to move it 2 decimal places to the right. The percent is per 100, and so this is not representing per 100. I need to move it 2 spots, so I know that we would have 75%. Okay? So when you're calculating a percent, make sure you move the decimal place 2 spots. It's not 0.75%, it would actually be 75%. Okay? That's why I left that little percent sign in there to remind us that that's the percent we're calculating. Okay? Let's take a look at another one similar to that. It says 32 is what percent, we don't know the percent, of 40. And so again, I'm going to rewrite this. 32 equals 40 times whatever percent. And inverse operation says the inverse of multiply is divide. I know 32 divided by 40. In this case, I am going to go the decimal route. Is 0.8 equals n percent. And again, I know I'm trying to find a percent, and 0.8% doesn't make any sense. 0.8 is like less than 1%. And so I have this percent sign on here to remind myself that, oh, I'm talking about a percent or per 100. So really, if I move the decimal place 2 spots, I'm referring to 80%. And that would make sense. 32 is almost as much as 40. not 100% of 40, but almost. And so 80% is an answer that makes sense. We'll do one more here, and it says 70 is what percent, we don't know the percent, of 50. So I always like my coefficients in the front. 50% of n, okay? So let's just inverse operation. If I squish them together, remember there's a multiply in there. If I divide both sides by 50, I believe I get 1.4 equals n percent. And the reason that I wrote that percent sign, I kept it with the variables to remind myself that I don't have 1.4%. I have 1.4 is the unit rate. I really want to have that per 100. So if I multiply it by 100, I really have 140%. Okay. And this, again, the reason I move the decimal is only because we're calculating a percent, and a percent is per 100. So I need to multiply whatever I calculate by 100. And let's think about if this makes sense. 70 is actually bigger than 50, and we want to know what percent of 50 it is. So it should be bigger than 100%. And so I think that the answer 140% does make sense. Okay. So that's it for today. Just keep in mind that is means equal and of means multiply, and I think you'll be in great shape.